we don't know that much about Bartimaeus. We don't know if Bartimaeus was born blind, or if he had an accident at some point, if he had an illness that cost him his sight. We don't know much about his family or friends. Did they treasure him and take care of him in his blindness? Or did they kind of cast him out so he was just a beggar on the street? We don't know how much Bartimaeus knew about Jesus before the day he met him. We don't know if he'd been asking questions for months and finding out information about this guy, Jesus, that's going around and teaching and doing miracles. Or if he'd just heard even that day that there's some guy coming through town, some guy who's around, who's going to be walking by today, who might be able to help you. We know that when he calls out to Jesus, he calls him the Son of David, but we don't even know if Bartimaeus had an idea of what that means. Or is he just hearing what other people call Jesus and echoing it? All we know is that Bartimaeus, when he heard that Jesus was nearby, started screaming his head off. Bartimaeus was screaming, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And it was enough that everybody around him was getting kind of freaked out and telling Bartimaeus, "Shut up. Bartimaeus, you're ruining this for everybody. I want to hear what the guy says. The celebrity's in town. I want to hear what he's going to say. Shut up. Bartimaeus, you're bugging people. Bartimaeus, you're scaring the kids. Bartimaeus, stop screaming. What makes you think you're so special? Why are you calling out so loud? Why is he going to pick you?" They're trying to shut him up and trying to shut him up, but he just keeps screaming his head off. "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus hears him. And he sends the disciples over to get Bartimaeus and bring him near. And they say those beautiful words, "Take heart, he's heard you." And they bring him over to Jesus. And then Jesus asks this really funny question. "What do you want me to do for you?" I mean, he's blind, right? He's blind in a world in which there's not a lot of help for people who have special struggles. He's blind in a world in which literally his only career option is to be a beggar, to be on the street just begging somebody to give him a little food or a little money. In a world in which that's, by a lot of people, even seen as a curse, seen as God judging you or judging your family. It's obvious what Bartimaeus needs. But number one, Jesus asks anyways. And number two, he doesn't say, "Bartimaeus, what do you need?" He says, "What do you want me to do for you? What do you want?" So pause for just a moment. I'm going to have two little quick questions here. Here's the first one. If you saw Jesus in the flesh in front of you right now, and he asked exactly that question, "What do you want me to do for you?" what would you answer? That's the first question. And I'm not giving you long to think about it. That's okay too. Here's the second question. I'm going to get a little meta for a second. Okay? Take a step back. When I asked that question, when I asked you to picture Jesus in front of you, asking you, "What do you want me to do for you?" what happened? Did you immediately have an answer and you thought, "Well, obviously there's this one thing I've been thinking about over and over and over again, I can't stop thinking about, that's what I would ask him for"? Or did you immediately kind of get in your head and come up with reasons not to answer that question? Or maybe you weren't trying to avoid the question, just nothing came to mind. There's nothing I need to ask for right now. Or maybe there's stuff I need, but just nothing's coming to mind. Or maybe there was something that started to come to mind, and you kind of shoved it down really quick, said, "I don't want to think about that right now." Some of you, it might have even been deep enough that you thought like, "I better not think about that right now because I don't want to like tear up and cry in front of my friends," right? All kinds of different reactions. About 10 or 12 years ago, I was on this retreat, and it's a once-in-a-lifetime retreat, okay? It's called the Ignatian Exercises. It's sort of this old traditional retreat, hundreds of years old. 36 days I'm on this retreat, right? 30 days in silence. For 30 days, I have 30 minutes a day to talk to a spiritual director, and 23 and a half hours a day that I'm supposed to be spending in prayer. And not like I'm on my knees for 23 hours, right? But I'm supposed to take a passage of scripture every day, a passage from the life of Jesus, and just spend the day on it. Pray, read it over again, pray again, journal about it, go for a walk and think about it, talk to Jesus some more about it. 23 and a half hours a day minus sleep, right? But, you kind of start even dreaming about the passages after a while. And I know that this passage is coming up, and I'm kind of worried about it. I don't want to answer that question. And I don't want to answer that question kind of because I don't want to get the answer wrong. What do you want me to do for you? I have it in my head, even though I know this isn't true, I have it in my head that I get one shot at answering this question. And like I said, once in a lifetime retreat. I want to give the answer that is, Jesus, I just want to give myself to you. Jesus, just give me more of you. Give me more of your presence. Jesus, help me to serve you well. Or Jesus, just help me to love you more. I want to give those answers. But I'm also kind of thinking about a girl. Right? Which was kind of embarrassing, even though I'm alone on a retreat. I'm embarrassed to be thinking I'm on a once-in-a-lifetime retreat. But I kind of want to talk to God more about a girl than I want to talk to him about how much I love him and desire his presence and want to serve him with my life. And I'm frustrated by that. And it's not just thinking about a girl. I also want to talk to him about jobs in the future and a career. Because I don't know if I found the thing that I'm good at yet. And I wonder if I'm going to live a life that matters. And I wonder if I'm ever going to find a career that I can both find fulfilling and that I can also support myself on. And I want to talk to him about that too. And I want to talk to him about friends, because I've made some really good friends, but I'm still lonely sometimes. I want better friends. I want more friends. I want to talk to him about all this stuff, but none of that seemed very spiritual. And again, once in a lifetime retreat, I got to make this count. I want to spend all of my time praying about the stuff that matters. But the more I was focusing on the stuff that matters, the less I was actually talking to God. The more I was telling him, God, I just want to love you more, the more I would find like I suddenly have 23 hours left to pray and nothing left to talk about. I can make myself say that again, but I don't know what to say next. Okay? One of the things I finally noticed in that passage that's so obvious in the story of Bartimaeus is he tells Jesus that he wants to be healed, and Jesus heals him. And in most of the stories coming before that where Jesus heals somebody, they ask him to heal him, and then Jesus goes away. There's even one story where there's 10 lepers who ask to be healed, and he heals them, and they all go away, and 9 of them just take off and never see Jesus again, as far as we can tell, and only one of them comes back and thanks Jesus. But in the story of Bartimaeus, it says that he was healed, and then it says he went on to be a disciple of Jesus for the rest of his life. I think that's part of the reason why we know the name Bartimaeus and not some guy that was blind. In the passage, it's Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus. He even gives like his dad's name, so you can really track him down. So if you're a Christian at the time, you actually can look him up in whatever the ancient Roman version of a phone book is, or I guess, I was going to say, of what Google is. I guess when you're talking about ancient Rome, it doesn't really matter which metaphor you use. However you look up people in ancient Rome, you could do it. You could look him up. You could look up his family, right? He's got a name because that getting what he asked for wasn't the end of a relationship. It was the start of a relationship. Okay. Now, flash forward. I've been a spiritual director, like Greg said, for over 10 years now. And it's really fun to be speaking at Biola because usually nobody has any idea what that means. And at least at Biola, like most people have like at least a roommate that's done spiritual direction, or you have a friend that tried spiritual direction once. But if you don't know what it is, basically it's one of the ministries I do, and I basically sit down with people in a room, and we just talk about their relationship with God. And mostly I ask a few questions and do a lot of listening. And what I'm looking for is, what is God doing in this person's life, and how are they responding? And it's kind of simple, but it's a really beautiful ministry. It's beautiful for me on the receiving end of giving direction, if I can say it that way, which is I get to sit in a room and see God at work in people's life. And sometimes stuff that I can't see in my own life is so much more obvious in other people's lives. The love that God has for people is sometimes so much easier to see as he's loving the person right in front of me, right? So it can be a really exciting ministry. And then sometimes it can get really boring. And I wouldn't normally say that. I wouldn't normally admit that in front of a group of people. I wouldn't want that to get back to my directees, right? Except I've learned over the years that when spiritual direction gets boring, it's almost always because what really needs to be talked about isn't being talked about. that what's really going on in a person's life isn't what we're talking about in the room. And often, just like me on that retreat, my direct E is wanting to talk about stuff that's spiritual and not talk about the stuff that's actually going on in their life. The stuff that God cares about too, but it doesn't seem spiritual enough. And so I've learned that anytime I'm in a direction session and there's just like no energy and it feels like nothing's going on, it's probably because we're talking about the wrong thing. But that doesn't mean that the direct E is always like making a conscious decision, I'm not going to share what's really going on. Sometimes they don't even know what's going on in their own heart, right? And the same is true in prayer for all of us individually. That one of the reasons that prayer gets really boring sometimes is that we're not talking about what's actually happening in our hearts and in our lives. We're not sharing what we really need to share with God because we're too focused on only sharing the spiritual stuff. Spiritual in quotes, right? We're only sharing the stuff that sounds really religious. We're not talking about that girl you like, that guy you like, the worry you have about passing this class. And I know God, doesn't want me to talk about that because I screwed up. I didn't study for it. I got behind on my reading. It's my fault. I can't talk to God about that. That's my own fault. Or I'm worried about a job, or I hate my job. I've got a part-time job and I hate it and I want to get rid of it. I can't talk to God about that. That's not spiritual enough. But when we're not talking about that stuff, that's when all the energy goes out of prayer. And all the life goes out of prayer. Because then we're just saying religious things. We're not actually opening up our hearts and sharing them with God. So I want to focus a little on that tonight, this idea of sharing what you really desire and what's really going on inside you with God. And that first kind of point, that first piece really is just to do that, to share what's really going on. Second piece I'm not going to spend much time on, which is once we start doing that, and only after we start sharing what we really desire with God, then we start to actually discern what's going on with those desires. Are they good desires, bad desires, healthy, unhealthy, sinful, godly? That could be a long, long talk by itself, right? How do we discern between the two? How do we figure out what's good and bad, and whether we want to keep wanting that, or do we wish that desire would go away? Long talk that I'm not going to deal with tonight, because it's a long topic, but also because tonight I want to focus on the stuff that is either godly, or that at least is kind of neutral. And neutral in the sense of just human desires, just the stuff we want. It's not bad stuff. I don't think we talk about that enough, so I want to put my focus there tonight. But I want you to kind of put a little asterisk there, right? Big topic. How do you discern what's going on with your own desires? How do you separate the good desires from the bad? Big topic, not for tonight. Yeah. Instead, I want to say, what do you do with a desire that's left open, that's left unfulfilled? I'll give you an example. So I am 36 years old, and I'm single, which means I've had decades of married people telling me how I should feel about being single, right? And it mostly falls into two extremes. One is, if you're single and you're any kind of adult, the next stage for you is to get married, and you should do everything you can to get married. And that's just what it means to be a grown-up. That's the next stage to be a grown-up. You want to not be sitting at the kids' table anymore. Go get married. Put your focus on that, right? Which is always kind of ironic, because if I'm going to be sitting at the kids' table, like at least Jesus is sitting at the kids' table with me, right? Like, at least he's apparently not grown up either, so that's cool. And now I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm kind of getting to the age where less people are saying that to me, which is worrisome in its own way. I don't know if they're giving up what, but one extreme. You want something, and it's a good thing, put all your energy into just getting that. Chase after it no matter what. The other extreme, just give up that desire and just want God. You don't want to be single anymore? Just submit that to God and stop wanting that. And sometimes it'll be just love God and don't worry about what happens or what he gives you. And other times it seems like this trick. I don't know if you've heard this. Just stop looking and then God will give it to you. Right? As soon as you don't want it anymore, he'll give you the desire of your heart. It's like, no, what is that? I heard it way too many times, though. So many times, right? These two extremes. And I'm just using the singleness thing as an example, but so many desires like that. Either chase after it entirely or give it up to God, right? Just let go of it entirely. But that's not what Scripture talks about. One of the best-known proverbs in the book of Proverbs, hope delayed makes the heart sick. Right? It's so famous because of Martin Luther King Jr. quoting it. He's talking about the desire for justice and equality and reconciliation. And he's in part responding to the often well-meaning but confused white Christian clergy, particularly in the South, who are saying, yes, that's good stuff. You should get all that stuff you're talking about, but don't be just too disruptive. Let's take it slow. Give us like 10 years, 20 years, 40 years. Now stop the protests. Give us time. You'll get it eventually. And he's saying, no, the book of Proverbs says, hope deferred makes your heart sick. And as I looked at different commentaries about that verse, there's kind of a small sliver of people writing on that verse who say something like this. The message of that is, don't hope for stuff. Because it's just going to hurt your heart. Only hope for God, because at least you're guaranteed to have God. You're guaranteed to have him in your life. You're guaranteed to have salvation. Just try not to hope for anything else, anything that you might not get, because it's going to make your heart sick. That completely misses the second half of that verse, the part of the verse that's not as quoted. Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life. There's no context for that verse, by the way, which is really great. So book of Proverbs, you just get this jumble of Proverbs. So that thing you always hear in your hermeneutics class of like, read everything in context. You don't have to, there is no context. That's all you get. It's a proverb, that matters, the genre matters. But what the genre matters means is that this is a slice of truth. This is one piece about what's true about the world. That when you have hopes, good hopes, real hopes, positive hopes, healthy hopes, but they're stretched out and you're waiting and waiting and waiting for them, it hurts. It hurts your heart. It does damage. It's like your heart is sick. But when a desire, a good, healthy desire is finally fulfilled, it's a tree of life. What a powerful image. Most of the time that tree of life image comes up in Scripture. It's talking about something like the design of the human being that God created flourishing, becoming what you were always meant to be. Often it's focused on sort of, even in kind of an Old Testament context, something like what we would talk about as the fruit of the Spirit in the New Testament. This idea of you becoming who you were meant to be under God and kind of fully flourishing, right? Here it's hard to know how much of that's going on in this desire fulfilled piece, how spiritual it is. It seems like it's just saying that finally when that desire is received, is met, you come alive and you're filled with joy, but you're also who you're supposed to be. And the thing is, if you're going to get rid of the hope to avoid your heart getting sick, you're also going to end up getting rid of that tree of life. You're going to end up pulling it out while it's still a sapling. Right? So I was 10 years old, and I went through, out of the blue, or it seemed out of the blue to me, I went through this really severe depression, 10 years old. Didn't really know how to explain that, didn't know what depression was at the time, didn't get any help. And really, for about a year, my life was just, honestly, a living hell. I was depressed all the time. And so I'd go about my day just trying to shut everything down and be numb so I wouldn't feel anything. So it wouldn't be sad and it wouldn't hurt. A whole year. And as I would try to kind of be numb, I'd get to a point where I was kind of overwhelmed and I couldn't do that anymore. I'd go through a day or a week or a couple weeks where I'd been numb constantly. I'd been hiding what I'm feeling the entire time for myself as much as everybody else. And I'd just be overwhelmed. So I'd go kind of hide somewhere no one could find me. And I would start getting angry because getting angry was the only way I could kind of stir up the emotion and get rid of the numbness. I'd get really angry. I would punch the wall. I'd get all kinds of angry. And when I was finally exhausted, then I could get sad and then I could cry. And then I could feel the depression that I'd been hiding from myself. And then I would pray, and I would talk to God about it, and I would tell him that I needed his help. I would tell him I needed him to rescue me from this. And in a sense, eventually he did. Because the depression just kind of faded. But it didn't fade like one day it was gone, It didn't even fade like at the end of a year it was gone. It was more like the depression got less and less severe over time. And at the same time, I got better and better at numbing myself. Psychologists talk about this as defense mechanisms sometimes. And what they mean by that is something like this. To protect ourselves, we have all these little techniques that make us safe, that keep us from being hurt. And those are genuinely helpful. They keep us alive. They help us survive. But they're also costly. So my defense mechanism, or my survival technique, was to take any needs I had that weren't being met and just try to get rid of the need. And just try to want less and want less and want less and feel less and less need. To try not to need anything. Because if I could not need anything, then I wouldn't have any unmet needs. And then I wouldn't be sad anymore. And then I wouldn't hurt anymore. And I got really good at that. I mean, I worked on it for about 10 years, 12 years. So I got really good at it. I needed less and less, and I felt less and less depressed, but I also felt less and less anything else. And during that whole time, I had a relationship with God, and it was actually growing a lot in different ways. I was learning a lot about God. And I was praying, but I was praying for all the things that I thought I should pray for. And I never really talked with God anymore after a while about what was actually going on inside of me. And it wasn't because I was trying to hide anything from God. It's because I didn't know what was going on inside of me. In order to protect myself, I'd sort of gotten rid of my inside entirely, in a sense. I'd gotten rid of my heart, it felt like. I didn't know what I was feeling, so I couldn't talk to him about it. And I didn't even know what I wanted, so I couldn't ask for it. It took me about 10 or 12 years to kind of get good enough at that, to finally realize that I didn't want to be good at that. And another 10 or 12 years to undo that through a lot of work and a lot of friendships and a lot of prayer, to start wanting stuff again and sharing my heart with God again, to undo that hiding from him. One of the things I realized is it's really easy to either put all your attention into the stuff you desire, say, God, if I can just have this, then I'll be fine. And I'm going to chase after that, God. It's a good thing. So I'm going to put all my energy chasing after this one good thing. Or to do what I did starting at 10, just try to get rid of the desire. Just try to not want stuff. And you can do that as a depressed little 10-year-old, or you can do that as a really spiritual college student who's saying, God, all I want is you, and so anything else I want, Lord, just get rid of my desire for that, so I only want you. But it's a lot harder to live in between, to say that I want stuff. God, there's a lot of stuff that I want. And I want to keep coming to you and talking to you about the stuff that I want. I want to keep sharing my heart with you. And I want to live in that uncomfortable place of having unmet desires, of having these needs that I want to be filled, that I want to keep talking to you about. I want to risk having a heart that might get sick sometimes because of hope deferred, if the upside is that, God, when you meet the desires of my heart, it'll be a tree of life. It'll be flourishing. Yeah. So again, first, we're looking to share our desires with God. Second, to discern between them. What's the good? What's the bad? Third, to stay open, even in the midst of those desires not being met. To stay open in that open-hearted, really uncomfortable place. Fourth, I think a change does happen in our desires, but it's a different change than those desires going away or just being chased after by themselves. One of my favorite theologians, this guy from the 12th century named Bernard of Clairvaux, wrote lots of books. His most famous one is called On Loving God. He talks about stages of love. And he says all of us start off selfish. All of us start off just loving ourselves. That's it. Just the way it is. But those fortunate ones who get to fall in love with God, we do. But we fall in love with God for our own sake. We start out loving God because of the things he'll do for us. Whether that's loving God because he's going to give us eternal life, or loving God because today he was so good to me. Loving God because right now in worship I feel him and I'm so grateful. Or loving God because he has blessed me with so many wonderful things. We love God for our own sake. And that's healthy and appropriate. A lot of people will criticize worship songs, for example, and say they talk too much about us. Worship songs should just talk about God and not even mention us. But I think Bernard would say, no, 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 no. That's appropriate. It's appropriate that you start out loving God because of the experiences he gives you, loving God because of the things he gives you. That's a good place to start. That's where we all start. Because we started out in love with ourselves for our own sake. It's a great, great step forward to love God for our own sake. That's a good place to start. But Bernard says you keep growing over time. And eventually you start loving God for his own sake, for his own sake. You start falling in love with God because of who he is, apart from what he does for you. And I know all of you are seeking that. Well, I don't know all of you are seeking that. I know many of you are seeking that. From spending a lot of time with Biola college students, I know how many of you want to love God for his own sake, and you're already on that journey and already going in that direction and asking for more love for God and telling God, I want to be less focused on myself. That's a really good and beautiful thing. But Bernard actually has a fourth stage that comes after that, and that's the one that always surprises people. He says, after you've come to the place where you can love God for God's own sake, then you get to the place where you can start to love yourself for God's sake. You can start loving yourself through the eyes of God. You can start seeing yourself the way that God sees you. You can start loving yourself because God loves you. You can start to ask how God feels about you, what he wants for you, what does he desire for you, and following him in that. And I think that's the place where our desires get set right, where it's not about what do I desire versus what God desires. It's learning to start desiring good things for yourself because God desires good things for you. So that whatever it is that's on your heart that you're focused on, you can, in one sense, start letting go to God. God, I really love you more than I love myself. I want to love you more than I love myself, at least. I want to give up the stuff that's getting in the way. But I also know that you love me, that you want good things for me. That in a real sense, you are standing in front of me, knowing what I need better than I do myself, and yet you're still asking me, son, daughter, what do you want me to do for you? I know I just messed up the Trinity there. Sorry about that. The Father's asking you, son, daughter, what do you want me to do for you? They'll take my professor card away if they hear that. That Jesus really does want to know what you want. Not because he doesn't know it, but because he wants you to share your heart with him. That he wants you to answer that question, not because he needs the information, but he wants you to talk to him. And part of that is, Jesus tells us over and over again that we don't have because we don't ask. He says that repeatedly through the Gospels. We don't have the things we need because we never asked him. Because he knows what we need, but he wants us to ask him. He wants us to talk to him about that. But I think even on a deeper level than that, not just getting the stuff we want from God, the idea, that image of Jesus standing in front of you saying, what do you want me to do for you? That's not a genie. That's not a vending machine. That's not a promise that he'll give you whatever you want. It's someone who deeply loves you saying, tell me about what you want. Tell me about that girl or that guy that you're interested in and they're breaking your heart. Tell me about the job that's frustrating you. Tell me about that class you're struggling with and the way it makes you feel. Tell me about your fear about the future. Tell me about your roommate annoying you. Just tell me about it. Tell me what you want so that I can be with you in that want, so I can be right by you. Again, there's no promise that that's going to make prayer instantly more interesting all the time or instantly all exciting. What it is going to do is start to build up and open up a more honest relationship in which you can actually discover who you really are and be that person in front of God. It's not about just getting to know God better. It's about getting to know yourself better in the presence of God. And in doing that, you get to experience his love for you. Not his love for who you wish you were, but his love for you just as you are. That's all. So as we go back to closing up, as you have some time to pray yourself tonight, as you have some time to worship, even a little bit of extended worship at the end of service, at the end of the chapel tonight, I just suggest that you just do a little start tonight. And you just picture Jesus in front of you asking you that question, what do you want me to do for you? And you just try to tell him. Don't worry about giving the right answer. Don't worry about giving one right answer. Just begin to answer that question. Jesus, this is what I want. This is what I think I want. Help me to tell you more about it.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.